Hi, everybody. Hey, thanks for coming tonight. I'm Dave Marthouse, and this is Hi, everybody. Hey, thanks for coming tonight. I'm Dave Marthouse, and Hi, everybody. Hey, thanks for coming tonight. I'm Dave Marthouse, and my credentials in the monitoring world go back to the mid-1960s. I was originally introduced to shortwave listening and broadcast band DXing by an uncle of mine that led to many years of monitoring, which I still do, an amateur radio license in 1978, and a career in broadcasting, which I still enjoy after 40 years of, 39 years of broadcasting professionally. And so that's my credentials to this wonderful thing we call monitoring. And we're going to look at an interesting ride. We're going to take a ride from 0 to 300 gigahertz in 30 or 35 minutes, plus a little bit of history, a little bit of mystery, and a little bit of information and some strange stuff that you, even if you've been a shortwave listener or a scanner listener or a VHF enthusiast, some stuff that you probably have not heard, because I like the odd corners of the radio monitoring world, and I like going where few people go. So that has led me to some interesting places over the years in the monitoring sphere. Well, first of all, when radio started back about 120 years ago with folks like Marconi and Tesla and Heinrich Hertz and people like that, it was basically impractical from the 1880s to the 1900s or so. It was a laboratory thing until Marconi started to apply some business sense to it and did the first transatlantic communication in 1901 between Ireland and the United States. Well, actually, Newfoundland, Canada, I should say, Signal Hill and Newfoundland. Anyway, he did his thing in 1901. And one thing about radio is that true in the beginning of the mode and to this day, frequencies have been ever going higher and higher and higher. We started out on long wave because that was the easiest frequency to access with the technology of the time. And just from a historical perspective, I want to play you just about 15 seconds of the first typical thing that any radio person would hear if they were monitoring about 10 years into the existence of radio in about 1910. This is a recording taken off an old wax cylinder of Morse code. I don't know what it is, whether it's the international code or the continental Morse code, or somebody just playing around with a spark gap. But Tom, can you play the Morse code 1910 about 15 seconds worth, please? That essentially is how Morse code sounded back then. It was recorded, incidentally, all mechanically. There was no electronic recording involved. It was recorded acoustically onto a cylinder from a spark gap at the time. And long wave was the first viable use of the radio spectrum. And long wave exists still today, believe it or not. It is still used for stuff which we'll get to. Now, I could play a typical non-directional beacon that's heard on long wave, or a broadcast station from Europe on long wave, but I'm going to dip into the history and play just about 30 seconds of a historical clip, which was the first real big play that long wave had internationally. This was in 1927. AT&T Bell Labs had no way of making an overseas call to anywhere that cables couldn't reach before that in the 1920s. So phone service stopped at the coasts, the Atlantic and Pacific coast, etc. One could not make a call to Europe or any other overseas location until 1927. Now, Longwave provided this possibility. They set up one circuit on 57 kilohertz going east from North America to England, and another one on 60 kc going west from North America to England to North America. And the folks at Bell Labs recorded it, and we're just going to play for historical perspective of how that sounded back in 1927. Tom, you want to play the long wave from first transatlantic phone call in 1927?
No, give it a shot.
Hello? Hello? Oh, good morning, Sir Evelyn. Yes, this is Mr. Gifford, Sir Evelyn. Good morning, sir.
What you do, Sir Evelyn?
I beg pardon, sir?
Evelyn is just coming on now.
Yes, you all right? Hello?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Do you hear all right, sir?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, you got the gist of it. And you know, believe it or not, people thought that that was incredible, and they paid in 1927 dollars $70 a minute to get that noisy circuit. And that was the typical sound of international phone calling back then, as done not on shortwave, but on long wave. Today on long wave, it goes from, the frequencies go from about 0 kilohertz to 500 kilohertz, the start of the AM broadcast band. The frequencies consist of today aircraft non-directional beacons, the amateur experimenters band, 2 ham bands, incidentally, and in ITU region 1 and 3, broadcast stations are in part of that band. That does not exist in North America. You just get the NDB beacons here and things like that. Let's move up the spectrum, past long wave, into the AM broadcast band. Well, people can, you know what typical AM radio sounds like. I'm gonna play you something interesting from a DX point of view. You can hear AM stations from around the country. As soon as the sun drops below the horizon, you can get New York, Chicago, St. Louis, that's common, and so on. But what I'm going to play for you is something that the broadcast band DXers with specialized equipment like beverages and people that are in great DX locations get on a regular basis. I'm going to play you 30 seconds or so of WBBR Bloomberg News Radio in New York City, as heard 3,900 miles away in Kongsfjord, Norway. Play that cut, Tom.
And CEO, on the new appointment and the future strategy for the group.
Our aim is to be slightly better than the premium segment. We expect the premium segment to grow single digit. So therefore, this is also an orientation for us. So to be fair, the 17% is...
That is what DXers can do. And people can even do it with modest equipment. I have heard on the broadcast band with a stock Sony ICF 2010 about 20 years ago when I was living in Metuchen, New Jersey, a station in Kvitsøy, Norway on 1314 kilohertz. They're running a megawatt, but I did hear them with a stock Sony 2010 about 20 years ago when I lived in Central Jersey. So that's what AM broadcast band DXers can do. We move above the AM broadcast band now, and we come to the 160 meter ham band, then enter the short waves. Now, the short waves have all sorts of things on them. Amateur stuff, as you well know, but also aircraft communication, maritime communication, which is primarily digital today, since most of the phone work in terms of audio is done by the Inmarsat satellites. You have diplomatic communications, which still occurs, spy stations, which broadcast strings of numbers that only other secret agents around the world can decode. time stations like WWV. Tom, play the next two cuts rapidly. They're about 15 seconds apiece. Play those cuts.
At the sound of the chime,
the time is now.
Well, that's WWV. Now, actually, that is jingles that some friends of mine produced as a joke to satirize WWV, because otherwise playing a time station would be rather boring, and figured got to inject some humor into this talk. So there you go. Now, continuing on the short waves, they're used for broadcast stations as well. Different governments have shortwave stations. There's commercial shortwave stations in the United States and other countries. But we'll go to an interesting historical thing from the shortwaves. In 1935, AT&T decided to do a public relations stunt, a phone call around the world where via HF they linked New York City going east to London, to Amsterdam, to Java, to San Francisco, and back to New York City. And this was history making in that era. In fact, it was broadcast on the NBC radio network as a special. So we're going to play about maybe the first 30 seconds of that just to let you hear one of the earliest, more bizarre uses of the short waves.
Hello? Yes? Hello? Good morning, Mr. Miller. Hello, Mr. Miller? Yeah. Oh, TG, by the way, which way does my voice go to you around this circuit? Goes west of New York and comes back to me from the east. Oh, mine goes through San Francisco. Yes, San Francisco, Java, Amsterdam, London, and New York. I see. Well, it's certainly quite exciting. I take it this is the longest telephone circuit that's ever been set up in the world. I don't think there's any question about that. Over 23,000 miles, they tell me.
And that was such a groundbreaking thing back then. It was considered good enough material for a special on NBC radio. Okay, now for a typical broadcast use of shortwave, Tom, you want to go to 7 RPK. What that is a classic recording of Radio Peking in China. Now, if you listen to them on shortwave, they sound very Western, very polished, almost like an American radio station giving the communist line. But let's go back to the Cold War. For those people who remember shortwave as it was back then, for the original Oriental, very exotic sounding
That is Radio Peking.
This is Radio Peking.
Okay, moving along now, let's go past the shortwave, go up to at least 30 megahertz, and go into what's called low-band VHF. Low-band VHF goes from 30 to 50 megahertz, and most of the occupants on those frequencies are things like taxi companies, construction companies, some police and fire rescue agencies are still on low band. Cordless phones, really early editions of cordless phones, stuff like that. Also, the military has some frequencies on low band 30 to 50. Past that, we have the amateur 6-meter band. After that, that's 50 to 54 megs, going from 54 megs to 88 megs is the old channel 2 through 6 analog television band. After that, the FM broadcast band. You know what that's like. I'm not going to play an FM radio station. After that, from 108 to 136 megahertz, you have the standard aircraft band, which is standard communication between aircrafts and airports, and you hear aviation weather broadcast and stuff like that. Above that, 136 to 144, the start of the ham 2-meter band, is military and government frequencies, also frequencies that have to do with the weather satellite broadcasting and other satellite services like the Orbcomm messaging satellites and other things. And Tom, I'm gonna play a short clip of a Chinese satellite, which they launched back in 1970 and was on those frequencies. In fact, you hear a musical tune that it broadcast called "The East is Red," which is the same tune that Radio Beijing broadcasted. You also, in the background, heard some RTTY there. So play 6 ChinaSat, Tom. We have next another interesting example of what satellites are in that frequency. This is the first communications satellite that was a proof of concept launched in 1967 to prove that small Earth terminals can talk with satellites and bring useful information down. It was an experiment sponsored by NASA called ATS-3. This satellite ran 30 years past its expected lifetime, and these are a bunch of scientists doing some tests with the satellite that broadcasts down on 137 megahertz. Play that, Tom? You get the idea of what was going on. Now, the reason the signals were fading in and out like that is the thing called spin modulation, because the satellite was spinning and the antennas on the satellite were changing polarization. They didn't have it squared away yet with the rotation of the satellite and polarization of antennas and so on. The signal was varying because the polarization of the satellite was changing according to the spin rate of the satellite. Just an interesting scientific fact. Okay, let's move on past the weather satellite and the ATS band and so on, the 2-meter amateur band. After that, 148 to 150 megahertz is another U.S. government band, which also has satellites and things like that on them. Before GPS became in every device today, there were a previous generation of navigational satellites which are still up and orbiting the Earth, which still probably work if you've got the equipment to decode their signals and navigate. But this was sort of the proof of concept for GPS. I'm going to play about 15 seconds of the Cosmos satellite, which downlinked on 149 megahertz, just to show you what that sounded like. Play that Cosmos 9, Cosmos NavSats. That was the precursor. That was the precursor to the GPS, which we have today. And it's still running today. That was the precursor to GPS, which still is running. If you take your scanner and put it around 149 megahertz, you can hear these things girdling the globe. They're serving nobody because I don't think anyone uses them, but they are still orbiting and will probably orbit for a couple hundred years, and they will send RF until their batteries die. Let's move up the spectrum. The rest, we have the commercial high band VHF from 150 to about 160 megahertz or so. That's typical stuff: police, fire, EMS, taxi, marine band around 156 megahertz. Then from 160 to 161, we have railroad frequencies. 162, the national weather frequencies. Now from 162 to 174, federal government resides, FBI, DEA, places like that, people like that, and most of that stuff is encrypted. From 174 to 216 megahertz is channels 7 through 13. That's the television band, high band VHF television. From 216 to 222, that's commercial stuff, nothing to a lesser extent, business communications, although they haven't really taken advantage of that part of the spectrum. There's a lot of automated things, telemetry, stuff like that. Now you have the 222 amateur radio band, which goes from 222 to 225 megahertz. And now you have something interesting after that. The military communications band goes from about 225 to 400 megahertz. That's a wide spectrum. Now on it are tons of stuff. Military aircraft, you know, talking to McGuire Air Force Base and Fort Dix and all sorts of military traffic. You have stuff like that. You have downlinks of military communications satellites, which we'll get to because there's an interesting backstory about that. In fact, we'll go to that. We'll go to that now. I'll tell you a story first. In the 1970s and 80s, the U.S. military launched a bunch of communications satellites to establish comms with troops in the field. You had a backpack radio, a small Yagi. You'd be able to transmit a signal up to one of these satellites and get to your base or command and so on. And most of these birds were geosynchronous satellites. They're still up there. The military still uses them, but they're gradually shifting to encrypted stuff in the higher bands, but the satellites are still up there. Now, a weird backstory about these is that not only do legitimate users use them, a whole bunch of pirate radio people discovered them, mostly down in Brazil, and they discovered the input frequencies, and it's sort of an underground radio thing. For some reason, only in Brazil, because most of the traffic other than the military are these guys essentially screwing around on the satellites. It sounds like CB, and in addition to that, they are possibly criminal organizations using them for drug smuggling and stuff like that, because they're what are referred to as bent pipes. What goes in goes out. You send FM to them, they send FM out. You send sideband up, they send sideband down. I'm going to play you the Brazil Sat Pirates. It's about 30 seconds. You'll hear them talking in Portuguese to give you an idea of what goes on illegitimately on those frequencies. Tom, play that cut, number 10.
Ô, compadre, você levantou agora, foi? Bom dia, você está precisando de ajuda aí? Como é que é? É o alemão que está fazendo teste.
Next cut, which we'll play, is the same bizarre characters, but it was around Christmas time, and I guess they were really filling their oats, because you'll hear what they're doing now. Play the next cut, Tom.
Oi, oi, oi.
Get the idea. It's like their giant CB. Well, Google, when you get a chance, Wired Magazine, Brazil Satellite Pirates, because in 2009, the Brazilian FCC tied in with the U.S. military busted a whole bunch of those people. And there was an article about them in Wired magazine around 2009 or 10, but they're still out there. You tune to particularly one frequency they like is 255.550, and you can hear with a reasonable scanner antenna, these signals are so strong, the Brazilian satellite pirates carrying on, and they're still trying to get them, and it's hard to find them because Brazil is not exactly a hospitable country. You go out of the major cities, jungles and the Amazon and stuff like that, so it's hard to track them down. And for some reason, not in any other country, but in Brazil, you see a lot of this illegal activity on U.S. military satellites. And there are also things on these satellites, unintended users. In other words, a satellite that sees 1/3 of the Earth's surface can essentially pick up whatever is sent up to them, even though if the signal's strong enough, even though it's not designed for the satellite, it can transmit back because the transponder's a bent pipe. So you hear, for example, a Russian mobile phone. Russia had some cordless phones somewhere in the 200 megahertz band, and you could hear their telemetry and people talking in Russian, which was not intended to be broadcast down the satellites. That's just sort of an incidental thing that happens. So just give them about 10 seconds of that, Tom. You hear the person dialing. Okay, that's enough of that. Now let's get to the legitimate uses of the frequency. You have the actual military, which needs these frequencies, using them. So let's go to next cut, which is Air Force One talking with Copenhagen Control via the satellites.
Copenhagen Control, Air Force One's with you, pass through 30.5 for flight level 250. Direct to Lamax, Air Force One. Descend to 170, Air Force One. Descend to 90, Air Force One. 119.8, Air Force One. Hit it, Mike.
Okay, also the United States Space Shuttle, when it was flying, its frequency, its downlink frequency for voice communication was 257.0. And they did it in AM, incidentally, because they could be compatible with all the Air Force and military aircraft, which already had AM systems on the frequency. So they continued to use AM for their transmissions when the shuttle was in orbit of the Earth. They also used microwave systems to talk with the TDRS satellite for more wider bandwidth comms, but shortly after the launch and before the reentry, they would turn on the 257.0 frequency as a safety measure, just in case they needed to communicate with regular military aircraft. So just play the next thing that says STS, Tom, and you'll hear how those signals sound.
Check in TACAN and GPS. Copy 2,000 feet at 195, Houston. And verify it was 6% on the speed break. There was a little echo there as you came in UHF. 50%. Okay, we got it. Taking air data, Houston.
Okay, you can go on to, you could pass by the next couple of items and go to 18, Satcom Air Traffic. This is an interesting thing that a guy caught in Europe. Some aircraft that were doing military exercises and wanting to keep civilian aircraft out of the area where they were doing their maneuvers. And this stuff was intercepted by one of those satellites. And this is the result.
Aircraft bullseye, 065, 53, 19,000, friendly track southwest. Pleasant 01, friendly traffic bra 035, 14, 18,000, friendly, single contact over descent. Got the additional friendly aircraft approaching TFR.
Okay, you get the gist of that. That's essentially them trying to keep unwanted aircraft out of the area of their military exercise, whatever they were doing. Another thing, getting back to unwanted signals on the satellites, signals that just happen to go on those birds because of frequency coordination problems and stuff like that. A radio station somewhere in South America had a studio transmitter link, which was a UHF frequency which transmit their signal from the studio to a transmitter remote location. What they didn't realize was it was also being picked up by a MILSAT, which downlinked the signal on the military frequencies, so it was heard over 1/3 of the globe. So just play about maybe 15 seconds of 21 Spanish broadcast. It's a soccer game, incidentally, and you hear a typical soccer announcer from Latin America, very excited and very caught up in the game, etc.
Corner número 11 del partido. Número 9 para Olimpia, segundo del segundo tiempo. Parte al centro. Golpe de cabeza, la pelota queda ahí. Nájera la tiene, gira Nájera. No puede rematar. Nájera quiere hacerse camino contra el área. No, ya perdió la pelota y parte la contra de Guaraní. Esto puede ser fatal para Olimpia. Va Ángel Ortiz.
And he goes on and on and on. And
who's waiting for the goal?
Yeah, it does come at the end, but we got a lot more to go through. So now let's go all the way to the last cut, which is Air Force One Satcom testing, because this is sort of unique. This is Air Force One, and we can assume that the president was on board, because an aircraft is only called Air Force One if the president is on the particular aircraft. And they seem to have problems with their encryption because they could not get encrypted comms going until they went through a whole bunch of different things. So it's a little longer cut, but it's worth hearing because you hear them really trying to get this fixed, and they finally get it fixed. And it's just interesting to listen to our military in action with problems. So play the last cut. It's called Air Force One Satcom testing.
Lions Den, this is Air Force One, how copy? Lions Den, this is Air Force One in plain text, how copy? Lions Den, this is Air Force One in plain text, how copy? Over.
Any station on this net, this is Comma 1, radio check, over.
Lions Den, this is Air Force One in plain text, how copy?
The text, over.
Lions Den, this is Air Force One in plain text, how copy? Over.
Air Force One, this is Lion Den, reach loud and clear, break. Be advised that we have the key, we need you to switch over, over. Air Force One, this is Lion Den, you copy, over? Air Force One, this is Lion Den, over.
Lions Den, Air Force.
And they go on, and they finally get encryption going. And of course, you hear digital signals, which nobody can make sense of. And the president or whoever was talking did his thing, and that was it. So an interesting side trip to the weird things you hear in the military bands. Further up frequencies now, past the MilSats and the MilAir stuff, we go 400 to 420 megahertz. That is federal government frequencies, the UHF version of FBI, DEA, Customs, Post Office, etc. on those frequencies. 420 to 450. The amateur band that we know and love, otherwise known as 70 centimeters or 440. 450 to 470, commercial, taxis, police, fire, EMS, television, camera trucks, things like that. 470 to 520, more commercial stuff, police, fire, EMS, etc. 520 to 760 megahertz. You have UHF television. 760 to 902 megahertz. We have the new 700 megahertz band where a lot of first generation cellular is going, plus a government cellular networks and stuff like that. You have police, fire, and EMS and stuff, business band frequencies. From 902 to 928, you have a ham band, which is our 900 megahertz band. But also that is used for Part 15 devices. So you have cordless phones there. You have baby monitors, all sorts of Part 15 devices which use the 900 megahertz band. Going above that, you have from about 940 megahertz to about 1,000 megahertz, 1 gigahertz. You have broadcast STL, studio transmitter links, which are used for bringing signals from a radio station studios to remote transmitter sites, like WBBR will send its signal from its studios in New York City to its AM transmitter in East Rutherford, stuff like that. 1,000 megahertz to 1,200 megahertz, you have radar, things like that. Aviation stuff, 1,200 megahertz. You have more aviation stuff. And 1240 to 1300 are 1296 megahertz ham band. From 1300 to 2400 megahertz, you have things like weather satellites, Inmarsat communication satellites for maritime stuff, things like that. Moving upward, we have the 2.4 gigahertz ham band, also stuff that you know very well, Wi-Fi stuff, a Wi-Fi band for all your routers and things like that. And the rest of the microwave spectrum has similar things like that. Radar, scientific and measuring instruments, communication satellite uplink and downlink bands, all the way up to 300 gigahertz, which is the end of the radio spectrum as we know it. Then we start looking at light waves, which is beyond the scope of this overview. This was, by the way, by no means intended to be a comprehensive discussion of everything that was on the spectrum, but just an idea of what you can hear and a little bits of history and some fun things from parts of the spectrum that you probably, most of you, have not monitored. And there's lots of stuff out there to hear with today, even with a plain shortwave radio, a scanner, especially with software-defined radios, you can do some phenomenal stuff. Particularly, you know, we'll probably be talking about that in future meetings of monitoring. That is by no means a comprehensive overview of the spectrum, but just to give you a rough idea of what's out there, and we figured would take you to some of the unexplored or lesser explored parts of the spectrum. And I figured for the rest of our time, since we are your group, we want to be open to members' input. We want to know what you're into as far as listening to the bands, and possibly take suggestions from you as future topics that we should cover. So I hope give it back to Ed, wants to perhaps help in proctoring this, and we can get some Q&A going and fill out the rest of the time with perhaps what you want to do for this monitoring group.
Dave, excuse me.
Yeah.
We have a request here for any kind of moon bounce at the 1200 megahertz. Do we have an example of that?
No, I don't. No, I don't.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
All right. Back to you, Ed. Thank you, Dave.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Dave, thanks very much for this. I mean, hopefully it was as good for you as it was for me. How's that for a cliche, right? You know, just in terms of things that, you know, I didn't know that was out there, and obviously a lot of historical stuff that I just, you know, you sort of think that you know, but you didn't necessarily have it. So Yeah, I guess as Dave sort of pointed out, first off, what questions or comments do you have as a group? We're a group of close to 60 here right now. So, I mean, let's be judicious with our time. But if you want to unmute yourself, say who you are. If you got a call sign, that's also great. And, sort of let's have a, let's ask a question to Dave or a discussion for the group. So is there anyone out there that wants to go first?
Yeah,
Dave,
Bob Maddox here listening to you. Bob Maddox?
Yeah.
Hi, Bob. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Bob.
Yeah, I was out with the Navy on the carriers off of Bermuda, and I don't remember if it was Al Shepard, one of them. We were standby rescue if we needed. And I can recall sitting on the flight deck, cranked up the UHF on battery power, and I could hear him going overhead. We're talking, we got 5-watt power on us. He probably had 5 watts power up there in his bird flying over. But it was very recognizable. It was kind of thrilling to listen to him just giving oxygen, how the oxygen was doing, reading off various progressive instruments on board, and it was fascinating.
Oh yeah, it's incidentally, they used not only UHF, but in the first couple of shots of Mercury and Gemini, they, believe it or not, used some HF frequencies for comms as well.
Yeah, well, HF, that's bigger equipment, longer antennas and all, yeah.
Yeah,
UHF at the time was that was a top dog of communications. Military.
Yeah, 257.0, yep.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robert. So,
okay,
other comments or questions? So, any other comments from any of the attendees here? If you just unmute yourself and identify yourself.
Yeah, this is Fred, W2ABE, and
Fred, good evening. Mm-hmm.
I get Spectrum monitors, so I'm kind of familiar with a lot of this. But Dave, you did a great job of pulling it all together, especially for someone who's relatively new to the hobby or to radio in itself. My main interest is broadcast band DXing at this point, but you did a really great job, and I really appreciate all you did. And thank you, Tom and Ed, for putting this all together in Nomar. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Let me tell you, I couldn't do it without Tom and Ed and Nomar, because key engineering factors were handled by those guys. I just had the easy job putting it together and talking.
You're very good at that.
That's good. Yeah, other comments. Just unmute yourself and identify.
Hi, this is Nev Greeno, N2GX, and
hi, Neville. How are you?
There's a signal that I've been hearing on at least 50 years on the HF spectrum, and I'll play you a little bit of it over a shortwave set here. Perhaps you can help identify what the heck this thing is. It's sort of a growling sound. This can be heard over a whole bunch of different frequencies. I'm sure it's some form of communications. Any ideas?
I am completely befuddled. I have no idea.
What's the frequency, Neville? So you get a chance to monitor it, right?
Yeah.
All over the place, like 4.345, 4.810, 5.215, 5.270, on and on and on.
That sounds like router interference or television interference.
I've been hearing television. I've been hearing that same signal for at least 50 years. And
me too, Neville. And I used to think that this WB2SRF, I used to think when I was a kid that it was like aircraft I was listening to. So that's been around a long time. It's some type of military data transmission, I guess.
4.825? 4.825?
4.810, for instance.
Well, yes, that's sort of tropical bands almost, right? Interesting. That's some. Maybe as a group we should put it together and just sort of monitor it and get a little subset on the sample and see if we can figure it out.
What are some of the other frequencies?
Sounds just like static to me.
Just tune up and down the bands. There's dozens and dozens of copies of that same kind of signal.
That's great. So others,
yeah,
other comments or questions?
I agree with Neville.
Yeah,
it's common.
Okay.
Good evening, Ed.
Other questions or comments? Unmute yourself and let us know who you are.
Hello. It's me.
Hi. This is Owen WB2E. I just joined in on the last few minutes of your stuff here. I've been listening on shortwave for many, many years, and I hear that signal as well as many, many other stuff that's baffling to me, but I listen in, so that's it for me. Great presentation.
That's great. So, other comments?
Bob,
N2SU.
Yep. I see Marlo, KD2SYO.
Yes.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
I just have a question. I'm pretty new to this hobby. I do have a license, obviously, but I haven't been at this all that long. I do have an IC7300 next to me, and I was just looking around, and there's this signal, and I have no idea what it is, but it sounds like this.
What frequency? What frequency is it?
7169.20 kilohertz.
I have no idea. It's some kind of digital form? No, it's too high in the band to be digital.
Yep. Yeah, it's analog.
Sounds like a timing signal for facsimile.
Yep. That's a good guess, Jim. Yep.
Maybe it's a slow scan.
What frequency was that?
Was that
7.169?
What frequency was that?
7.169, I think, Marlo, right?
Yeah, 7.169 megahertz.
Might have been a slow scan TV signal.
Nothing there now.
So yeah, and Marlo, let me pick up on that, because you said that you're relatively new and and welcome to the group. So yeah, and it's sort of part of why we're trying to put this group together. It's a special interest group as a part of the Fairlawn Amateur Radio Club. Now, obviously, you don't have to have a ham license, and obviously a lot of us do here, to be a member of it. And then what we're trying to do is just get people together, from around the area. And if you're outside the area, you're welcome as well too. Just to sort of group our interests together, okay, so that we can sort of share and answer some of the questions that you're asking here tonight. So just sort of pool our common interests. My interest is really listening. I'm out of the news business. And I'm interested, right now in terms of listening to Radio China, in terms of how they're approaching different audiences in the English language. Okay, obviously they've sort of become the voice of America or old Radio Moscow in terms of looking at what their outward communications are, and that's my interest, having come from the news business. But I'm also interested a lot in really being part of a lot of Facebook groups on SWL, and interested, just as the hobby is morphed. What people are interested in there, and how we might be able to incorporate some of the people who are locally into this group as well too. So, and I will make it, just a subtle pitch. I'll talk a little bit about the group before we close. But if you're interested in joining this group, okay, just send me an email. My email is wx2r@arrl.net, wx2r@arrl.net. Okay, and if you just put SWL, how's that for a real simple header? SWL, and I'll add you to our list. Okay, and obviously it's just an ongoing group where if you have questions like Neville had, or like you had, Marlo, I mean, those are the types of things that we'll try and handle as a group and handle it that way. Everybody with me on that? wx2r@arrl.net, and in the subject header, just SWL. So let me turn it back to any other questions or comments that you may have on the presentation tonight.
This is W2DLT, Ed.
Yeah, Van, go ahead, please.
For those of you who get CQ magazine, I'm sure you're aware that there is a monthly SWL column that's very extensive. There's people from all over the world that put input into what they're hearing and what it means and whatever. So if you don't have CQ, you might want to think about subscribing to it, because that column alone is worth its weight in gold for SWL. Over.
That's a good point. Yep, good point. Thank you for that, Van. Other comments?
Yeah, N2SU here.
Sure, Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, I started out as a AM broadcast band DXer back in 1968, and I still dabble in it a little bit every now and then. But there are a couple of clubs online that you can get involved in. One's the National Radio Club, the other is the International Radio Club of America. The one thing I'd like to talk about is, for some people, this is their main course in the radio hobby, and there are some people who've gone literally out in the desert out west in places like Utah, and they'll set up these beverages. And one of the perfect examples of the reception that can give you, somewhere in my audio archives from around 2004, I have a recording. This takes place in December, and this fellow had about a 1,200-foot beverage in the desert, and at high noon, he was picking up 1560 in New York and WBZ in Boston in the middle of the day.
Wow. Wow.
that's the kind of reception you can get with those long beverage antennas.
Very, very interesting. So other comments or questions?
WA2BAU.
WA2BAU, yeah, BAU. Gary, go ahead, please.
Hi, Ed, and hello all. Dave, great presentation. You left out one little area in between channels 4 and 5 of VHF
Oh, I know
TV.
what you're going to say. The 4 megahertz slice. Yes.
72 to 76, formerly known as midband. Anything doing with that these days?
Well, there's some stuff that supposedly commercial people use it as a relay, or have used it in the past as relay stuff to get signals from repeater site to repeater site, but that's been replaced for the most part by IT ways now. And it's also, I think, some kind of aviation stuff. There's an ILS or some kind of aviation thing that's at airports that's on those frequencies as well, just a telemetry of some type.
Yeah, there's what they call the outer, middle, and inner marker beats.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
There used to be a lot of remote control equipment for that band, and I know the big three, RCA at the time, GE and Motorola, were making two-way radios, mobile equipment, and base station equipment for it, but not portables. But I don't know if any of that's still being used.
Okay.
Anything else there? Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Norway Golf 7 uniform.
Yes, please go ahead, sir.
Robbie Robinson from Portland.
Yes, hi, Robbie. How are you? Yes, Robbie and I communicated by telephone earlier today, and we're glad to have you on board, sir. And you're from the Northwest Vintage Radio Society out in Portland, Oregon. So we're really glad to have you on board. You have a comment for the group?
Very going across the beginning to the end. Those I've never heard of before. So he did a thing, and for some of the used to run radio stations. Any of you guys?
We're having a little problem hearing you.
Yeah, the internet's having some issues.
Yeah, such as technology, right? It's better over the air.
Am I speaking?
Yes, so we can hear you. Oh. Yeah, go ahead, Brian. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's signal. It's SIG ID Wiki, as in signal identification, and then like Wikipedia, and it's so SIGIDWiki.com, and basically the website has you can see waveforms. You can click on those things. You can hear what it is, and then there's a large library of identified sounds, as well as a large library of unidentified sounds. So if you want to be like as smart as Dave and know what all these signals are, you can go there and listen to all this stuff and try and memorize it all. But it's a good website for finding out what all these weird noise patterns may be that you can pick up on the radio.
Right. Brian, you are the poster child for us in terms of why we're trying to put together this group. Okay, because being able to share information like this, I think, is just really great. You know, the knowledge of many is always greater than the wisdom of one, right? So that's really why we're trying to look to put this group together, to be able to share questions and answers like this. All good, all good. Thank you very much. So, any other questions or comments before we sort of move just to final remarks, that type of thing? Anything else?
W2JC.
W2JC, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, just a little comment. A beverage antenna is not made out of Pepsi cans. It's named after a guy named Beveridge, Mr. Beveridge, who invented it.
Who's famous for a lot of other reasons, right? So great. So, thank you for that background. Anything else? Okay. Okay. Any other questions or comments? I guess I get the final word. So anything else beforehand?
Norway Golf 7 uniform again.
Yes, please go ahead, sir.
I was asking a question about anybody with a amplifier.
Yeah, it's a real tough connection, sir.
You'd have to repeat that. Because he dropped out somewhere in the middle.
Yep. It's a real tough connection. So
Can you repeat that, please?
Okay, sure. I'm building an AM radio station, and I'm looking for a state level amplifier by Gates.
Wow, that's an old piece of technology from the 70s.
Ed, I'm running a tube station.
Oh, okay.
I've got a Gates yard control.
Oh, wow.
I've got two Gates powers, 2 Gates turntables, and a Gates recorder.
Wow.
Any other comments? Paul, I see you on the screen. Paul Walker, you just popped up here.
Hey,
waving.
Nomar invited me to watch tonight, Dave. It's nice to
Paul.
hear from you. We haven't spoken in a while. Great presentation. I'm turning 37 in the fall. I've been DXing for 25 years, and I've lived in a bunch of different places, and I do everything from AM to shortwave, usually taking advantage of whatever the land gives me. When I lived in, I can almost see Russia from here, Alaska. I did AM and shortwave. When I lived in Pennsylvania at something like 2,000 feet in elevation, I did FM. And I also work in broadcasting like Nomar has and like Dave has. I do an afternoon show here in Wyoming. I also do an overnight show across the country, and I also run the I Take Pictures of Transmitter Sites group on Facebook. So I don't have my ham license, and Nomar's been bugging me about that on and off for a while. I eventually plan to get one, but I have a real big interest in the tech side of radio listening. I like to know why things tick and how they work and what makes them break.
Thank you. Thank you.
WX2R MP4H.
Go ahead, sir.
Okay, I wanna take this short opportunity for 2 things with Paul. One, I'm gonna put him on the spot on one thing, and it's before anything, good to have you with us, Paul. Thank you very much. I've known Paul since he was a little kid, and he would go with his mom to the radio station I worked at.
Eighth grade,
Yep.
Nomar. It's been about 20 years.
Yep, and that's when I was over there managing 3 radio stations in Hartford. I'm going to put you on the spot on one thing, Paul. I would like, and I spoke to Dave about this, for you to one of these evenings talk and give us a presentation on one of your areas of expertise, which is AM and FM DXing.
Okay.
Plus, Dave mentioned to me that, and you mentioned part of it, of your experience in radio broadcasting in Alaska. So maybe,
And
well, not
in
maybe.
Alaska.
Yes. So, putting you on the spot to see if eventually you could coordinate with Dave and give us that presentation. That's one.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, Alaska is, I mean, I could probably do an entire presentation on DXing and broadcasting in Alaska. It is a very, very, very unique place. Stuff happens there. You do stuff there. You deal with stuff there that you'll never deal with anywhere else.
Excellent. So you know what? We're looking forward to that. And number 2, I know that you write in different groups on Facebook, and I always follow you very much on all what you do in terms of shortwave listening on AM and FM DXing. You mentioned something that I think is going to be coming up very soon, and I think it's going to be of interest to many of those that are here tonight in the group. And it's there's going to be one of those transmitter facilities workings where transmitters will be going off the air, allowing for better DXing. You said that's going to be taking place now in August? For maintenance?
There are, I've arranged 2 DX tests for AM stations, one in New Jersey and one in Montana that's going to be taking place in mid to late August. WNJC 1360.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. They're about to lose their transmitter site. And they are going to do a test for a couple of days on and off for us. And then we're going to get a test from KSEN 1150 in Shelby, Montana. The guy who arranged the test for KJJR 880 in Whitefish, Montana, which is Kalispell, is going to take care of the KSEN test for us. The station's been operating at other than licensed parameters at night. They're finally getting around to fixing it. And he said, I said to him the other night, I said, hey, can we get another DX test out of you, Todd? He said, sure, I've got to go fix KSEN finally, so why don't we do that? So once those DX tests get arranged and we get definite dates, I'll put them out. I was the one who arranged the test for KJJR 880 in Whitefish, Montana. The farthest reception we know of going east was 40 miles west of New York City.
Wow. Wow.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Paul. And
Yeah,
keep
and
us
Paul,
in the loop.
if we can ask you a favor too, to get the word out about this group, okay, to the
Sure,
groups that you work with as well. Okay.
I'll get with Nomar at some point this weekend, and we'll.
That'll be great. Yep. So great. 73's to you.
Thank you,
sir.
Paul. 73.
So yeah, let me just close this out because I'm watching the clock here. So just again that this is a special interest group on monitoring. Okay, that's part of the Fairlawn Amateur Radio Club. The club is located right outside New York City. For those of you who are outside of New York, we're about 160 members. You don't have to be a ham to join the group. Okay, we're glad to have you. Okay, we do run a weekly net on Monday night at 8 o'clock. If you're in the New York area, it's on 145 470 minus with a PL tone of 167.9. The call sign is W2NPT. We're also available on Echolink on the W2NPT node. We also have a YouTube channel, okay, at Fairlawn Amateur Radio, Fairlawn ARC. And we have a number of presentations up, which span probably about the last 5 years, okay, in terms of things that we've done, as part of the club. Again, if you're interested in joining our group or staying in communication, there's two things. Obviously, I mentioned the one. If you want to send me an email at WX2R Whiskey X-Ray 2 Romeo at ARRL.net, and in the subject header, just put SWL, Sierra Whiskey Lima, okay, and I'll pick that up and put you on our list. And secondly, if you have a ham call, hopefully I've grabbed it, as looking at the screen here tonight, and I'll send you a personal thank you, okay, as well as an invitation if you're interested in following up more with the group. So if there's anything else, obviously we do monthly programming. We'll keep you on our list, okay, for upcoming speakers. And obviously, hopefully, Paul, you can be one of us, okay, as we go forward on that. So, with that, yeah, Nomar, I guess, I'm just looking at here, do you have any other items of business before we close, or should I close it out?
No, I don't. I just want to say on behalf of the Fairlawn Amateur Radio Club, thank you to all that joined us tonight. It's been a pleasure having you. We are very happy that these presentations that we're offering, not only to our members, but to friends of our members and all of you know, no matter where you are, we really appreciate it. We thank you for sharing these moments with us, and we hope that you, in the very near future, come back to us and, enjoy a good time and also take something out of it, which is learning something new or improving whatever you know on topics, because we do have a good assortment of members that know different topics that I know are of interest to many. So thank you all. Have a blessed weekend.
David, thank you again. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Okay.
Talk to you later.
73s, everybody. And good night.
73.
Well
Good
done,
night.
Dave. Hey, thanks, Dave.
Good night.
Great. Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
And good night, Mrs. Calabash, wherever you are.